I want you to imagine how you thought about living a good life when you were younger. What that would have looked like. For most of us, it probably would have been a soccer or a football player. For most of us, it might have been a fireman or a nurse. For most of us, it might have been the president. It was these sort of depictions and heroic depictions of these different genres. And I do apologize for using sort of sexist terms, but that's how we thought about things back in the day when we were younger. Um, all of these sort of depictions of what things are often the very small snapshot of what it actually looks like and what it's about. It's the one fleeting moment of actually looking at some person's or another person's occupation, or it's a description that was told to you about an occupation. But I want you to take a step back and start thinking about the day to day and what that entitles. And I think that that is an interesting story because the day to day of a person's life is not the glorified heroic pictures that are often described or that you think about or that you imagine, that there is this moment for the president, for example, that's standing behind a flag and saying something that is very important for the nation. It's actually a lot of meetings, it's a lot of boring things, it's a lot of procedures, it's a lot of the same old stuff that you think about and you see in any any domain. And we think about moving up, and it's a super interesting thing, right? That if we get a promotion, for example, we think that our life is going to be changed or it's going to be spectacular. Um, we think of all these kind of strange ways to think about things, or sometimes I guess it's the power that you're thinking about of moving up in a hierarchy, but it's really strange because nothing spectacularly often happens, even though that you might have more power and influence. You might be talking to people that are sort of higher up in an organization, but it really doesn't change that much. And in fact, it is the same old routine things that happen. And I want you to imagine that. And the reason why I get you to think about this um, is to get us to start thinking about just real life, what real life actually is. Because we have these sort of depictions or storytelling ways of going about things that are not really quite reality. Somebody tells you a little story about an occupation and you think that's really what it is, right? But the reality is that it's for most occupations, for most things that we do, is actually quite tedious. It's quite boring. It's quite ordinary in terms of what you actually do. And when you deconstruct the sort of what things are and what they actually look like, and you break it down into the little components of everything that you possibly can do, all of a sudden you start realizing that we as human beings don't necessarily have that many choices. I guess is what I'm thinking about, is that the arena that you go into and the area that you go into is no different than any other arena, and it's what everybody else is sort of prescribing to you or projecting onto you in terms of what you're doing. Right. So, for example, you might go into an industry job and get some, you know, industry job that is not necessarily respected. Right. So, pharmaceutical sales. And I apologize for anybody that's in pharmaceutical sales, but you know what I'm talking about. A lot of people, there's a conception in modern society that that is bad. I don't know why. Um, but that you go into it, um, and when you realize and you go into it, it's like, hey, there's no different. the actions are no different from pharmaceutical sales compared to, selling VCRs at the local shopping mall in the 1980s, right? Like, there's no difference between a lot of these actions and what you go through, and it's just humanness activities often, right? And when you break it down and sort of are thinking about things in a very humble way of what the activities entitle, then you start to think like, hey, what does it mean to actually live a good life? Meaning, living a good life is often, it's often very subtle, right? It's thinking about um, how can I feel the things that you think are sort of important to you, and how do you check box those things? It might be like grace, for example, or it might be like joy, it might be happiness. Is a very complicated construct. It might be like accomplishment, these sort of things that you think that we can't necessarily measure in any sort of way, but they kind of do give you some feelings of, doing something. They give you what's called utility, right? All of those things. If you figure out what are the things that give you utility in your life and you just live a simple life, you can get a lot of joy out of doing anything. And you can feel very good out of doing anything. And it's a matter of having this perspective of, wait a minute, I'm okay doing this or doing that. And I simply just have to apply myself. One of the things, and I'm going to be honest, that the academic research part of things, the writing is very hard. It's super hard to sit down and write for me. Um, and I struggle with it. That's something that I will always struggle with, and I think it's just doing the same old thing for a long time, for an extended period of time, is very tedious for me. So I learned how to, take subtle breaks, for example, little breaks, or I learn um, at what moment I start feeling grumpy, and I go and I pause and I try to find something else. And I know it's predictable that in the morning I'll feel good, and then in the evening I'll feel grumpy. Um, all of those things, if you sort of add those up, um, allows you to sort of regulate and think about how it is that you can actually live a good life for you, and think about what does it actually mean to live a good life? How does that actually work? And as long as you're sort of checkboxing the things that make you excited, that make you more of a complete person, I think that's all that matters. And it doesn't matter what you're doing, and it doesn't matter the sort of level or whatever that you're thinking about. All that matters is that you're just living a good life and pursuing things that are joyful, that give you utility in some sort of way. I think if we take a step back and we think about things and remember that much of life is very mundane, it's very much the same old, same old, I think you should be okay. All right, take care and have a wonderful day.